Screen's down. Looking at this lantern, okay? Looking at this lantern. The sides of identical quadrilaterals. How can you check to see whether this is a parallelogram right here? What's one way of checking whether it's a parallelogram? Nah, it looks like it. If opposite pairs of sides are congruent, then it's a parallelogram. What about with the diagonals? If the diagonals bisect each other, then it's a parallelogram. Now, how do we check if it's a rectangle? If the diagonals are what? Say it. Congruent. If the diagonals are congruent, then it's a rectangle. If you've ever seen people work construction and they pour concrete and they're trying to make a rectangle patio or a square or something like that, they'll measure corner to corner. Because if they measure corner to corner and it's the same, that means they have right angles in each corner. Okay, they've made a square or a rectangle. And that's why they do it. Now, they're just, most of the guys don't remember geometry when they're doing it. They just know that if they measure corner to corner, it has to be right angles at the corners, which is what they're working for. Okay, because if you build a crooked base for a building, then the building is crooked and it makes it bad. Okay, all right, so ways to identify a parallelogram. First of all, if all the opposite sides are parallel, then it's got to be a parallelogram. If the diagonals are perpendicular, then it's got to be either a rhombus or a square. Okay? So we'll just go past that. So if the diagonals are perpendicular, you know it's a rhombus. If the diagonals bisect opposite angles, you know it's a rhombus. And this shows the people measuring the diagonals of the deck. Okay? So, if these two diagonals are congruent, will the deck be a rectangle? If they check from here to here, and if that's the same as from here to here, did they make a rectangle? Yes, they did. And that's what I just got done talking about, the people pouring concrete, making sure things are square. So if the diagonals are congruent, then you have a rectangle. So what they want to know is, what is this? Is it a rhombus, a square, a rectangle, or what? Well, we know this is congruent to this, and we're told it is a parallelogram. So in parallelograms, opposite sides are congruent, and diagonals are bisected, so it makes it a rhombus. Because when the diagonals are bisected, but the more important, all four sides are congruent. Now, it doesn't. If it's at a right angle at this corner, then what would we know it would be? And then it would be a square, but we don't know about any right angles, so we can't say that, so it's a rhombus. Okay? Here, opposite sides are congruent, so we know it's a rhombus, and then diagonals bisect each other, so this is equal to this, and this is equal to this. All of a sudden, all the diagonals are equal. Since all the diagonals are equal and all the sides are equal, what does that mean? It's a square. Okay, it's a square. They just have it tilted so you can't tell that it's a square. Okay, they're playing with your mind a little bit. But since these are congruent, that means these are congruent. That means everything's congruent, which makes it a square because the diagonals are congruent. Okay, it says this is a rhombus. What do we know about angles of a rhombus like this? They are equal to each other. So figure out what y is. 65 minus y equals 5y plus 5. So 60, if we subtract 5 from each side, minus y equals 5y. Adds y. So 60 equals 6y. Y equals 10. So to figure out x's, set these two equal. 4x plus 3 equals 5x minus 10. So subtract 4x. So 3 equals x minus 10. Add 10. X equals 13. Okay. This is the same type of thing. 1 and 2, you would set equal to each other. 3 and 4, you'd set equal to each other to figure out what x and y are. You guys are smart. You guys can handle that. A group of friends set up a kickball field with bases 60 feet apart. How do we verify that this is a square? That just makes a rhombus. All sides being equal just makes a rhombus. Doesn't make sure it's a square. How do we figure out if it's a square or not? Think pouring concrete. If the diagonals are equal to each other, if they would measure from here to here and from there to there, if those two diagonals are equal, then it's a square. If they're not equal, it's just a rhombus. Okay? So if they wanted a square, they measure the diagonals. So they measure from home to second and from first to third. If they're equal, then it's a square. Okay? So a parallelogram is a rhombus if the diagonals are perpendicular and the diagonals bisect opposite angles. A parallelogram is a rectangle if the diagonals are congruent. And the parallelogram is a square if the diagonals are perpendicular and congruent, or if the diagonals are congruent and they bisect opposite angles. Okay? So that's what your assignment will cover. We will get started with that.